I'm gonna start it.
America.
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 Americas.
Americans.
Americanos.
American.
Americano.
A merry-go-round.
Amerigo Vespucci.
An Italian.
Welcome to Map Men.
We're the men.
And here's the map.
I was hoping this video was going to be about that. A lot of my family is from Nicaragua, so I grew up with it just kind of hammered into me not to refer to the United States as solely America, because Central and South America are also America. So I like that they added pictures of Latin people in reference to America in the intro here as well.
The United States of America is a 5-word country.
States, United, the, and of are all self-explanatory, but the America part makes a lot less sense than you might think.
As we all know, America was discovered by Christopher Columbus in 1492.
And discovered is the right word because there definitely weren't people living there already.
And it was definitely him who discovered it, not the Chinese in 1421 or the Vikings around the year 1000.
The China theory is heavily debated.
And it was definitely the United States of America he discovered in 1492, not some Caribbean islands.
Good to be clear.
But although Columbus had reached a new world, he never reached the realisation he'd reached it.
He'd set out in search of an alternative route to the spices of the East Indies and wrongly thought he'd found one.
And so he named the Caribbean islands the West Indies because he'd sailed west to find them. Which is weird because if he thought about it and he had actually gone around the world and hit the East Indies, he'd have hit them on the east side, so he probably should have called them the East Indies. So if he had been right, the West Indies would today be on the eastern side of the Indies, which is ridiculous.
But Columbus wasn't the only European who'd had a 15th century midlife crisis that involved buying a massive boat and sailing west until he'd come to terms with his own mortality.
Just 1 year after Columbus first reached the South American mainland, Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci got there second.
But the crucial difference between Vespucci and Chris, as people in the voyaging business referred to him, is Vespucci did know he'd reached a brand new continent, and word soon spread of an exciting new world.
Hear ye! Hear ye! Do you ever think about how whenever I start something like that, I know the next words are going to be nerdy. But do you ever think about how Christopher Columbus is just the English version of his name, but he likely didn't speak English, so that's not what he's actually called? Or in Spanish, he's
Cristóbal Colón.
But still, not his name. I feel like I read his actual name once, but I'm not positive, so I don't want to guess it. I'll write it here. Something similar happens to the late Queen Elizabeth II. Sometimes you'll hear a Spanish speaker refer to her as Reina Isabel. Isabel is the Spanish version of the name Elizabeth. That's actually a lot less straightforward than the Christopher one, because Isabel actually is a name in English along with the name Elizabeth. Not every country translates names of people or movies, for example, but I think it's kind of weird to do that. I wouldn't mind calling him Cristoforo, or however you pronounce his real name. Or I've heard the band U2 called U2. That's actually a lot less acceptable to me.
There's a brand new continent we knew nothing about until now, full of gold and spices and exciting new vegetables.
Mapmakers around the world set to work creating new and up-to-date world maps, each with their own dreadful renderings of the increasingly but still not very discovered continent.
One of these mapmakers was a German called Martin Waldseemüller, who in 1507 had all but finished his magnificent new world map, except for one small detail: what to name the new continent everyone was talking about.
He very likely would have named it Colombia, after the widely agreed discoverer of the New World, Columbus. But Amerigo Vespucci had some very clever PR people who were falsifying documents and spreading lies about exactly when he'd reached the New World.
And these lies must have reached the ears of Martin Waldseemüller.
You're listening to the Vespucci Hour on Explorer FM.
Amerigo, he got there first.
Because he made the fateful decision to label the new continent America.
Latin for Amerigo.
Waldseemüller published his map complete with an unnecessarily long Latin title.
Complete map following of Ptolemy, the tradition, and of Amerigo Vespucci, of others, also the illustrations.
If you zoom into his map and look carefully, you can see the little word America in what we now call modern-day Brazil. It was the first time that made-up word had been used anywhere by anyone ever.
Nobody knows why Martin named it after Amerigo's fairly common first name rather than the Vespucci part. It's a bit like if I discovered a continent and they named it Markland instead of the more enticing-sounding Cooper World Jonesania.
One part of the New World that Martin clearly didn't give much thought to was this bit up here, which he drew super small and super inaccurate.
If the United States took the name Colombia, I wonder what the country of Colombia would have been named. I'll confirm, so don't quote me. But I think the United States became United States before Colombia took that name because they were called something else. What were they called? I don't know. But Maybe they would have just had to rearrange the letters and they both could have been some version of Colombia.
So it may surprise you to learn the inhabitants of this area were the people who, centuries later, cared the most about this map.
Fast forward 500 years to the 90s. Throughout the 90s, the United States tried desperately to get their hands on Waldseemüller's map.
Because it contained the first use of the word America, the US considered it to be their birth certificate, not minding that it had actually been given to a different baby since they had no qualms about swapping babies even though they were now grown adults.
At the time, Waldseemüller's map was sitting in a drawer in the private collection of Prince Johannes zu Waldburg, Wulfeg und Waldsee in Germany.
They wanted it so much they paid $10 million for it, making Waldseemüller's map by far the most expensive map in history.
Wow.
In 2007, the map finally earned its wrongful place on display in the United States Library of Congress. How a library was able to raise $10 million, we can only guess.
So how come America got to name itself America? You'd think that writing the Latin word America on Latin America would mean America should describe Latin America. So why is non-Latin USA allowed its A at all?
Part of the reason is that they achieved independence before any of the other 34 American countries.
In 1776, the 13 colonies that had been known as British America used their rifles to shotgun the name the United States of America.
Over time, the long name the United States of America got shortened to just America, which is how the English-speaking world almost exclusively refers to the United States today.
And as you might expect, or if you're an American, as you might never have given any thought to, this annoys a lot of people.
Whom does it annoy?
Latinos.
First, Latin America. In the Spanish-speaking world, the word America on its own always refers to the entire continent, and never the country.
We talked about this in another video, but how many continents you believe there are completely depends on where you studied or where you grew up, where you went to elementary school, whatever age you are when you learn about continents. But I've heard people say 5, 6, 7, less commonly 8, but I've even heard 8. Personally, I stop at 7. The last time we talked about this, it caused a debate in the comments with people who believed there were 5 and 7, each thinking they were right, which makes sense because people watching are from different countries. But it's weird that there is no international consensus or an international standard for how many continents there are. Because I've seen credible sources arguing all 3, mostly 5 and 7 to be fair, but write down how many continents you were taught that there are.
Which they call
Los Estados Unidos.
They even set up a petition demanding Los Estados stop stealing their name and get a new one right now.
With 308 signatures, it's surely only a matter of time before America concedes.
Second, Canada. Canadians resent the USA arrogantly naming itself after their shared continent, but not as much as they resent being mistaken for Americans by people who can't tell their accents apart and confuse them with people who serve cheese out of a spray can.
Third, British people. Couldn't they just keep calling it British America? It had such a nice ring to it.
But I think the Canadian accent and the US accent aren't always easy to tell apart. I mean, sometimes a vowel sound will give it away. And let's just assume we're not talking about French Canadians, and neither of these people are speaking slang. But if you're listening to someone from Toronto or Ontario, and you compare that to a more neutral accent from the United States, I don't think you can always decipher where that person is from. Of course, if you hear someone from, what's a state that has a very strong accent? Mississippi. And someone from Newfoundland, okay, they sound very different, but I can't always tell. I don't know, can you? Maybe I have a bad ear. That's also a possibility.
You're British.
Fourth, Chris Columbus. If the Americans do insist on naming their continent after a European explorer, Columbus, lest we forget, was actually there before Amerigo Vespucci. As it is, Columbus had to settle for the US capital, a province of Canada, another country, countless other towns and cities, and a national holiday.
whoa.
Poor guy.
And lastly, Amerigo Vespucci himself, who died never knowing these new lands were to bear his name in so many confusing and overlapping ways.
So, if the United States of Americans did want to change their name, what on earth could they change it to? Any attempt at a rebrand would come with its own controversy, and of course it's hard to imagine patriotic Americans ever actually voting to be called anything else.
Even though it appears that the US Library of Congress spent $10 million on a map that suggests its country gave itself the wrong name, it looks like the USA of America will go on calling itself America for many years to come.
Classic America.
This was another video from Jay Foreman. You're going to find the channel and the video linked down below. Please keep sending in these language videos. For me, they're the most fun. But I like this channel so far. This is the second video, I believe, I've seen from them. Both were educational, and these guys are very funny. So I'm keen to watch more of them in the future. Now back to naming United States Colombia. I'm in Colombia right now. And first of all, I kind of guessed before that it was named after Columbus. I think that's right. I don't know. I'll confirm. But tying that back into the UK, which this video wasn't about the UK, but these two guys are from there. There's something curious about the architecture in Bogota because it takes a lot of influence from England. Like you can see Tudor style buildings and Victorian style buildings. Of course, there's a lot of contrast because Colombia can look like this, but it can also look like this, and this, and this. For a literary recommendation, because we were speaking about the United States of America, an author that comes to mind is one called Paul Auster, probably because I just finished another book of his. But the book is called 4321. Full disclosure, it's a very long book. Not even Harry Potter long. I mean, Harry Potter should not be a metric for what I consider long. It's Murakami long. There's something like 800 pages. And I did put the book down a few times while I was reading it for months at a time. But once I finished, I was like, that is good. It's about this boy and 4 parallel versions of what his life could be if there's a slight variation in factors. If his parents are rich, if his parents are poor, if his parents divorce, if he goes to this college, if he doesn't go to college, etc. And the characters remain the same in each parallel version, but they play different roles depending on what changes. I think it's a special book. If you've read it, let me know if you liked it. And if you haven't read it, I'll have it linked in the description. I remember looking once if it was in the public domain, but Paul Auster is still alive and it wasn't written that long ago. So it wasn't then. I'll check again. If it is, I'll link you the free audiobook version. If not, you'll find the book linked in the description. And let's skip to the music recommendations. There's a rock band from Chile called Los Prisioneros. The song is called Tren al Sur. This is a classic. Many of you might have heard it already, but synth rock, they were popular in the 80s and 90s. I think this particular song came out in the 90s. Let me know how you like it if you listen to it. And lastly, we'll go for America's brother, Canada. Who's an artist I know from there? There's a boy, man, called More More. The track, Heaven's Only Wishful. And I think he's a good example because if you hear him in an interview, I wouldn't know right off the bat if he's from United States or Canada. Very neutral accent. This song is more alternative indie. So of those 3, let me know which you like the best. And leave your thoughts on this video and any recommendations you might have. Other than that, that's really all from me. So thank you for watching with me, and I'll catch you in the next.